Hello there, and thank you for tuning in for Lesson 2, Lecture 2. I hope that you find this lecture very relative to your upcoming speeches because what we're going to be discussing today is going to be research. Now, I know that doesn't sound like a very lively topic, but trust me, this is some great information and some things that you can really start to think about and use in your own speeches. Okay, so I want to start off with a quote here, and this is one that has always caused quite a bit of discussion in my classes, but the quote says, "Learn, compare, collect the facts. Always have the courage to say to yourself, I am ignorant." Now, let's really think about that because the word ignorant has so many negative connotations to it. What does this mean? What does ignorant mean here? Basically, what it's saying is having the ability and the courage and the strength to look at yourself and say, I'm not fully educated on this topic, or I haven't researched this topic enough. I might be ignorant to something that I'm not very familiar with. So I know that has a strong term or strong connotations to it, but it's something that we all have to do at certain points in our life, especially when it comes to certain topics and subjects and fields and so forth. Now, one of the major goals of an education as a whole is just to kind of help students become more information literate. And you'll find by the end of your college career that you're able to research things a lot better, a lot more efficiency, to really look at the information and decide to accept it or reject it, depending on what criteria it meets. And I hope that you even learn some of that by the end of this course. So one of the major goals of a college education is just to help our students to become more information literate. Now, information literacy can be defined as the skills one needs to locate information efficiently and to evaluate what one learns. That's something by the end of this lecture that I hope that you are able to more fully grasp. Informing your audience, though, is more than just personal experience. It involves responsible knowledge. Now, by definition, responsible knowledge is an understanding of the major features, issues, information, latest developments, and local applications relevant to a topic. So having responsible knowledge and incorporating responsible knowledge just means that we have a clear and well-researched background or information on these major issues, information, um, features, and so forth that surround our topic. It says that we are going to be a responsible speaker. A lot of times students ask me why they have to incorporate research when they already know so much about the topic. Perhaps you are doing an informative speech on a disease and it's one that you suffer from. Well, a lot of students say, well, I have a lot of information on this because, of personal experience. And while that can be a great way to support your points in terms of using testimony, it's not the be all end all. And we'll talk about later on in this lecture why you need further information than that. Sometimes it could just be that the information you have is a little biased, or maybe you just need a wider spectrum of things. Just a lot of different things there. But one thing to always keep in mind is the greatest minds in the world use the support and research from other people through quotes, direct quotes, or paraphrasing, or any of that kind of information to better support their own points. We always use our knowledge and the knowledge of others to build on each other. So it's very important that you understand that. And just looking at your textbook, you'll see that at the end of every chapter, or just maybe it's at the end of the book as a whole, that you'll see a reference area. And that is because the author has acknowledged that they are not the be all end all of that field research. They are not the person that knows absolutely everything there is to know on that topic. They use the research and skills of other people to build on their own knowledge and also to support their already, pretty informed thoughts. Okay, so responsible knowledge includes information on, like I said, the main issues of your topic. You need to consider what respected authorities or even experts say about your topic and the latest developments that are relevant to it. So to develop responsible knowledge, you need to first begin by working on your speech well ahead of time, because if not, you're going to be tempted to rush through the research. And when we rush through the research, there's a lot of things that can happen. We miss valuable information that should have been included. Sometimes we rush and just find random research, which might not be the most credible. You might not show both sides of an issue because you were rushed and you just showed what you wanted to show, and So there's a lot of downsides to rushing through your research. And I know I sound like the typical instructor that says work ahead on your studies, but it's true. When you're doing a speech, to be a responsible speaker and to possess that responsible knowledge, you need to make sure that you're researching your topic well in advance so that you have a very well-rounded speech and one that is responsible. You should also conduct your research with an open mind. I know a lot of times people don't really think in terms of that. They go, well, I'm doing a persuasive speech and I want to make sure that everybody thinks this way by the end. Well, you need to open your mind to the research. There are times that you're doing your research and you think that you have a well-informed opinion of something, but when you start actually digging into the research, your opinion might change. And if that happens, that's perfectly fine. But either way, you need to be open to both sides of an issue. Think of it in terms of a social interaction. Let's say that in your relationship with your significant other or maybe with a family member or just a friend, that you're in a situation where that other person looks at you and says, you're wrong and you need to think this and that's just all there is to it, and they refuse to listen to your point of view. Well, what are you going to do in that situation? You're going to shut down because there's no open-mindedness there. There's no listening to your point of view. It's just you're wrong, that's it. I'm not thinking anything else about it. We always want to strive to be open-minded with our research because it says and show both sides of an issue with your research. If you're doing a persuasion speech, you need to say, I know a lot of people think this, but I think this and this is why, and support it with research. And that's going to show people that I am open-minded to your point of view, but this is why I feel the way that I do. Okay, and again, that works well in persuasion speeches. So even if you're convinced that one side of an issue is absolutely correct, you need to try to discover why other people might feel differently. Doing so helps you to develop your speech just in a better manner. Also helps you to reach other people that you wouldn't normally reach. One other example I'd like to give here is, and this is one that a lot of times students have used, persuading other people to become organ donors. Well, of course, everyone wants to do good and save the life of another person, or even perhaps just make their life a little bit better. But there are a lot of myths about organ donation out there. I've heard them all. I've heard that, people have said before that the doctors won't try so hard to save your life if they see that you're an organ donor, or, there's a possibility that you might not be fully passed before they decide to take your organs. Of course, I know these are outlandish myths. Of course, I know that. However, those are things that stick in people's mind, and they make them say, you know what, I just don't know about that, so I'm just not going to do it. You cannot, in a persuasion speech, pretend that those things don't exist. Because when we pretend those things don't exist, we're never going to reach part of our listening audience. Because some people do believe that that myth could be true or might be true or is true. So we have to take into consideration that there are other points of view out in the audience, and we have to introduce those myths in our speech and also debunk the myths so that we can make people understand why that couldn't be possible or why that's not going to happen to them. And then they're able to move past that issue that they have and possibly be called to action and be moved to become an organ donor. So just something to think about there. So always be open-minded with your own research and always be objective with things as far as research goes, and always make sure that you consider that there are different types of listeners in your audience, and you can't just pretend that something doesn't exist. You have to acknowledge it, support it with research, and move on. Okay. So having responsible knowledge earns you the right to speak. Let's really think about that statement. Having responsible knowledge earns you the right to speak. What do you think I mean by this? Well, what I mean here is that when we are responsible with our knowledge, when we've gathered the research that needs to be gathered in a credible, open-minded, objective, and efficient way, that earns us the right to speak on a topic. We've all heard people in our lives, or we all have people in our lives that just kind of say things all the time but don't really know much about that topic or know much about that subject as a whole. Well, we automatically, unfortunately, discredit what they start to say because we just know that they're not informed, that they just talk, basically. So We don't want to be that as a speaker. We want to have that responsible knowledge. We want to present ourselves as credible and well researched, and then that earns us the right to speak to those listeners. Whenever you speak, you put your mind and character on display. So I know a lot of times people have a lot of hangups as far as public speaking goes. If you're only um, if you're not only relaying responsible knowledge but just your own experiences, what do you think that the listeners are going to feel? So if you're deciding not to use that responsible knowledge, not to back your points up with responsible research, but just to use your own personal points of view and that's it, how do you think that's going to make the listeners feel? Well, it's going to make them feel like, you're just giving your opinion, that's it, and you don't know a lot about your topic. We want to make sure we're always trying to incorporate that research to really support our points and to show people that we've done the research and we are knowledgeable on this topic. We should be considered as a credible person and a speaker as a whole. Now, on the other hand, responsible knowledge just enhances your competence and your character as a whole. So it's really important that we work to include responsible knowledge and credible research into our speeches. Now, although you're probably not going to become an expert on your topic when you start your research, you can certainly learn enough about your topic to speak responsibly on it. So because your research time is limited, we want to make sure that we follow some form of a strategic research plan of attack. When we do this, it's going to allow us to be a more efficient and effective researcher as a whole, to gain that credible information in a more productive manner. So the first thing you need to do when you do this is assess your personal knowledge and experiences to determine what additional information you need to obtain. There will always be a need for more information. No matter what you're researching, you will always need more information. So what you want to do is retrieve this extra information, this additional research, by using a library as well as internet resources. It says interviewing people here, but for this class, I prefer that you stick to the basics of research, which would be library research as well as internet research. You want to always make sure that you're using reputable and credible research references, sources, whatever you want to refer to it as. You want to make sure that you're using credible, responsible knowledge. And then while you're doing this research, you need to make sure that you're taking careful notes as you do this research so that you are more efficient when you're creating your speech as well. Okay, so drawing on that personal knowledge and experiences. Like I said, personal experience and knowledge can really add a great deal of credibility, authenticity, and interest to a speech. And there are great ways that we can incorporate this. We can use this with like I said, our own personal experiences. It basically just gives a little bit more of a personal touch. So I could tell you all day long about, oh goodness, let me think about something. I can tell you about why someone should donate blood, but unless I add a personal experience or a story to that, then it's going to be difficult for you to connect. If I'm just telling you the facts and the statistics and so forth, that's so much hard information, which I do, that kind of information goes a long way in a speech. So I'm not discrediting that. And you should definitely use a good bit of factual information and statistics and so forth in your speeches. But adding that personal experience through testimony can really help to connect to the audience, connect to the listeners, and make them to feel pulled to become, people who donate blood. Okay, and one way to do that, let's say that I was doing a speech on why you should donate blood in a persuasion speech, obviously. Well, I might want to talk about how when I was much, much, much younger, let's just start there. I'm not someone who is fond of needles, so I was never the first person to jump at the fact of donating blood. But then when I met my now husband, who I've been married to for quite some time now, but since I've married my husband, he's told me when we first started dating that he had an aneurysm at the age of 18. It was a miracle that he survived, but he only survived because people out there, were very giving and selfless and decided to donate blood. He lost a lot of blood, as you can imagine. He had obviously had internal bleeding in his brain. It was something that he was not supposed to survive, but because of people who donated blood, he was able to receive enough blood, to have the surgery he needed to correct the issue. And he's alive and very well today. He has no um, physical impairments because of what happened. He is fantastic. It's like it never happened. But it's only because people decided to donate blood that he is able to live in live in my life today, basically. So just something to keep in mind there. That's a way, of course, I would create that narrative to be a lot more clean and focused and, with a clear plot and so forth. I would deliver that in a way that was a lot more effective than what I just shared with you. But that is a great way to incorporate some form of testimony to connect the listener to your topic. If you've already listened to the lesson 2, lecture 1, then you heard me give a personal account of how knowing how to do the infant Heimlich maneuver saved a small child's life. Well, that's another way to incorporate that personal knowledge and experience to really create a credible, authentic, interesting speech. But that can't be it. It also has to use facts and statistics and so forth. So you may not be an acknowledged authority on a subject, but personal stories or examples suggest that you have a unique insight into what this topic is. They also make it easier for an audience to identify with you and to the topic as a whole. However, like I said, as valuable as personal experiences can be, it's seldom sufficient to provide all the information that we need to be a credible speaker. We need to make sure that we are incorporating facts and figures, testimony, examples, statistics, just all those different things to really create a solid speech. Now, this isn't just done in informative and persuasive speaking, though. Your demonstration speech, which is coming up soon, can use facts and research and so forth. So let's say that I am doing a demonstration speech on, let's see here, on how to make this yummy strawberry cake that my family makes. Well, ways that I can incorporate personal knowledge is really easy. I would talk about how this recipe has been passed down for many years. I would talk about the first time I ever made this recipe. I had written down the recipe for my grandmother, and she forgot an important step in the process of telling me at a very young age that you actually had to cook the icing. I just thought you could mix all the ingredients in a bowl and slather it on the cake. So that would actually be a very funny narrative if I were to design it, and a great way to add some personal knowledge and experience to the speech, just to kind of give it a little bit more of a personal touch and provide a little of a lighter air in there as well. And I could talk about that while I was mixing the ingredients so we don't have that dead air. I could actually incorporate that narrative. But some other ways to incorporate responsible knowledge in the speech is, let's say while I'm stirring in the oil into the cake batter, I could talk about how, CookingLike.com says that instead of using oil, you could incorporate applesauce in place of the oil, and it would actually cut down the fat content drastically in the cake. You could talk about how you could replace certain ingredients to make it more, just more healthier as a whole, or how cooking it in a different way, for instance, making cupcakes instead of an actual cake, could also work. And you would, of course, use references from different websites or uh, recipe books or so forth, and that would count as research in your speech. So, just some things to think about there. So in addition, you don't want to just use personal knowledge, because your personal knowledge could be limited, it could be biased, or it could just not be the typical experience. Even respected authorities look to experts just to add a little bit more credibility to their speeches. You can use your personal knowledge and experiences as a starting point, and then you want to expand on that through your research. So doing research in the library. Give me just 1 second. I'm going to take a sip of water. Okay, so doing research in the library. Although knowledge obtained in the library may lack in the excitement of personal experiences, it definitely has its advantages. A few advantages are that library research is generally pretty credible. When going through the publishing process, there's a lot of fact checking, credential checking, and so forth. So generally, if it's published and you find it in the library setting, and of course it's not like a magazine or something like that. If it's an actual published book, it's been through the ringer as far as checking credibility and so forth. So it can have its advantages in that just pulling information from the library is generally a pretty credible area to pull information from. You don't really have to think a lot in terms of credibility and so forth because it's already kind of done that for us. Another thing is when you go to a library to do research, it's very convenient because you can ask the librarian for help. So if you're just not sure where to go with this and you just want to talk over what you're thinking about for a course assignment, a lot of times they have a great range of information to offer you and just help in general. So library research can give you a very broad perspective and a sound basis for speaking responsibly. It can also extend, correct, or just enrich your experiences by acquainting you with new knowledge, so to speak. Another thing is when you use library research, it can help you to be very effective because, like I said, you can ask a librarian for help. You can use the catalog. And a catalog is just basically a listing of all the books, periodicals, and other resources owned by the library. So that could be a great place to start as well. And then you can also refer to reference works. A reference work is a work that synthesizes a large amount of related information for easy access by researchers. Reference works include things such as encyclopedias, quotation books, and biographical aids. So just something to note there as far as reference works go. Okay, they also you also can look at newspaper and periodical databases. Those can be very helpful. Those are going to be, uh, that's actually a little out of order there. That's actually going to be, newspaper and periodical databases are things you can generally access on online libraries. So a virtual library. And virtual libraries are so wonderful because they combine the credibility of a traditional library with the efficiency and productivity and 24/7 access of online material. So I use virtual libraries quite a bit just because it works better with my schedule and the information is so credible. So newspaper and periodical databases, that's going to be a research aid that catalogs articles from a large number of magazines, journals, and newspapers. And that can contain some great information, but my personal favorite is an academic database. And an academic database is a database that catalogs articles from scholarly journals. If you've ever used something called EBSCO, EBSCO is a an academic database. Um, LexisNexis could be referred to that as well. I'm trying to think of a few. Academic Premier is another one. So those are all, usually you can find these in a virtual library as well. Your school will have a virtual library that you can access. And that's, it's going to be, like I said, that database that catalogs articles from scholarly journals. And I can tell you if it's in a scholarly journal, it's pretty factual. It's pretty credible because that is a very stringent process as far as credibility checking goes. Okay. But kind of going on to that internet there that we were talking about, and because we were just talking about virtual libraries, the internet does offer a wealth of information. And now I'm not just talking about virtual libraries, but I'm talking about the internet as a whole. It just offers us a great amount of information, but we always want to use it with caution because anybody can publish anything on the internet, and that's just something we always have to take with a grain of salt. So the internet is also very flexible in terms of our schedules, and since we're taking a distance learning class, then we know that flexibility is key for our learning. The internet is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So whenever you can when you don't have time to go to a physical library, for instance, you're not near one, schedules just don't allow, whatever it might be, you can always access the internet to find some information. General search engines are a good place to find information, but like I said, you have to use these with caution. A general search engine is an internet search engine that allows you to enter a keyword and find related websites. A good example of that is going to be Google, Bing, things like that. So results, though, may be organized in terms of relevance, or popularity or even by the date. So it's not anything to do with credibility. It's up to us to check that, click on that link and check it for credibility, check it for quality, which we'll talk about how to do that in just a second. But like I was saying, virtual libraries are just so wonderful because they combine the credibility of a traditional library with the convenience of just the internet as a whole. So virtual libraries are basically a search engine that combines internet technology with traditional library means of cataloging and assessing data. So in terms of general search engines and the internet as a whole, though, we have to keep in mind that when we search for something on the internet, these things aren't screened. The links that pop up are not screened for quality. So that's going to be up to you to decide if that information is usable and credible. And in terms of credibility, we always want to look at, in regards to this website or this article, is the author clearly identified? And if so, are they an expert on the topic? If they're not an expert, that's okay, but can his or her opinions be accepted as objective and unbiased? If you're reading an article or you're on a website and you can tell that they just feel overly emotional about whatever it is that they're talking about, that means that person is not objective. They are very biased, and we want to steer clear of that research because it's not credible research. They're not incorporating responsible knowledge. So if there is no author, which is very common for internet research, you want to look at, can the sponsoring organization be determined? Because sometimes it's a sponsoring organization that's in control of that website or wrote that article. And when we look at that, we also want to look at, does the sponsoring organization have a reputation for expertise and objectivity? Now, I know that some of my students may be a fan of them, and that's perfectly fine. I'm not diving into that, but PETA is a prime example of that. If we are talking about a speech on animal rights, PETA doesn't really have a reputation for being objective, obviously. They are very over the top with their advertising campaigns. I've seen some very extreme advertisements by PETA. I've seen some very extreme techniques used by PETA. While I'm not denouncing that at all, I am saying that that's not probably a organization that we would want to incorporate for research in our speech, just because um, it's not objective and it's very biased information. So does the document include a copyright date? And that's going to be found at the very bottom of an article generally, or a website. Does it include a publication date or a date of last revision? It needs to incorporate one of those things. Copyrights, all of those things basically just allow us to track down the person that released this information, and if they are telling us a fib, then they could be sued. So when that is on the table, a lot of times people choose not to pass on faulty information. So just something to keep in mind. And if a date is included, is the document recent enough to cite? If we're talking about first aid techniques and the article we find is from the 70s, we might want to find something a lot more recent because that information is probably out of date. In addition, we also want to make sure that we're especially careful when we evaluate that information like we found on the internet, and we just talked about how to do that, but we want to avoid Wikipedia. I won't go into this very much, and I know a lot of my students do use Wikipedia, but you want to avoid using that for credible research in your speech. It just has a very bad reputation because years ago, you could go on Wikipedia's website, click edit, and type whatever you want. And while they have went on and cleared up a lot of this faulty information, some is still out there. So we just in case, we don't want to pass on faulty information. And another short little story here is that many years ago, the New York Times actually did an article, and was an investigative article on the credibility of Wikipedia. And they found one person, and I'm sure he's one in a million, but they found one person that had altered, just for fun, I'm not sure why this was fun to them, but it was, they altered over 50,000 Wikipedia articles with faulty information just because they thought it would be funny to do so. And so if people use that in their speeches and their papers and so forth, they passed on faulty information. And when we do that, that could change the information that we understand and perceive. It could change history if you really thought about it. So we just want to avoid Wikipedia as a whole. Just keep in mind that anyone can put anything on the internet. The internet is subject to very few, if any, legal, financial constraints. It's really easy to get away with faulty information on the internet. So we always want to look back at that credibility checker that I just went over as far as the bottom of this slide goes. Okay. Tips for doing research. Like I said, you want to start early on your research. When you do that, you're not rushed through it and you're able to be a responsible researcher. Another good thing to do is make a preliminary bibliography. And a preliminary bibliography is a list compiled early in the research process of works that look as if they might contain helpful information about a speech topic. And I'm going to tell you, you can do that in a research paper as well. I make preliminary bibliographies quite often for the research that I currently do. And I just start off by researching my topic and doing a preliminary bibliography of information or of works, articles, the research I've found that might contain helpful information that I'll go back into and really look at it and decide if I want to use it. You also want to make sure that you're taking notes efficiently and carefully while you do your research. Don't make double work for yourself. Take the notes, jot down little keywords here and there that remind you of what this article is about so that you can go take a look at it again. Think about your materials as you research them. You will see your topic just a little bit differently with every note that you take. You may even change your mind about something, who knows, but you want to make sure that you are really being efficient and productive with your research. Supporting materials. Supporting materials are the materials that we use to support a speaker's ideas. And I've been touching on this for the entire lecture so far, but the three major kinds of supporting materials are examples, statistics, and testimony. Now, examples are a specific case used to illustrate or represent a group of people, ideas, conditions, experiences, or such. Examples can have a large effect on listeners' beliefs and actions because they just provide a deeper personal touch to things. So the question a lot of times from my students is, should I use only factual examples? It's perfectly fine to use factual examples, but you can also use hypothetical examples as well, as long as you let the audience know that what you're using is a hypothetical example and it's not one that actually happened to you or happened in general. Statistics are another great way to support your ideas in your speech. And statistics are really simple. They're just numerical data. Now, I do want to say this. A few tips for when you do use statistics are excuse me, that's a tongue tire for me. Use statistics sparingly. You don't want to give off too many statistics because people will basically just drown in them when they're listening to you. So don't give off too much of that. Use visual aids to clarify statistical trends. So you can use a chart, a graph, anything like that to really clarify statistical trends for your audience. When you just start shooting off a lot of numbers, it can feel overwhelming to the listener. So a lot of times just showing it on a graph or a chart can be more visually effective. You want to round off complicated statistics. So if I have no idea, I'm just kind of making this up right here, but if 222,768 people were affected by a certain disease last year, you wouldn't want to say that many. You would say over 200,000 individuals were affected by this disease last year. Okay, you want to round that off, because if you don't, it makes the statistic very complicated for your listener to process. And you always want to make sure that you identify the source of your statistic. It's really easy to when you incorporate the research in your paper, sometimes to forget to give credit where credit's due. And you might say, well, how do I do this? How do I incorporate research and avoid plagiarism? Or just add more credibility to that fact by letting people know that it is a fact and it's not just my opinion. Well, you do that by using verbal citations. A good way to use a verbal citation would be, according to the American Heart Association, over 200,000 people last year alone had a heart attack. Okay, I just said according to, and I gave the organization that was responsible for that statistic. You would also want to do that with facts and testimony if you can. You want to make sure that you include verbal citations. It makes your speech more credible, and it really highlights the factual information that you're presenting. And testimony is the third kind of supporting material. Testimony is quotations or paraphrases used to support a point. A speaker must always name the person or organization that you are quoting or paraphrasing in your speech. So you might say, according to District Attorney James Smith, and give your quote. That's giving credit where credit's due, and it just adds more credibility to your speech. Now, what kind of testimony is out there? Well, there's a few different kinds of testimony you can use. For instance, expert testimony. Expert testimony is testimony from people who are recognized experts in their fields. This is a great way to lend credibility to your speech by using expert testimony. An example of this could be including testimony from doctors or other respected medical authorities when discussing a speech on the barriers faced by people with physical disabilities. That's a great way to add expert testimony. And of course, you always want to say who that quote was from or where you paraphrase this information, who's responsible for that, who was the expert. You also, another great way to include testimony is peer testimony. And that's going to be testimony from ordinary people with firsthand experience or insights on a topic. So not everyone is an expert that you gather testimony from. It could be peer testimony as well. And a good example of that would be including personal, non-expert testimony from a person who experiences including personal, not necessarily expert testimony from a person who experiences these physical disability barriers on a daily basis. Someone who actually goes through their daily routine with this physical disability. Okay, testimony can be directly quoted or it can be paraphrased, but you always want to make sure that you verbally cite the person with whom you are using this information. So how do you incorporate testimony? How do you work that into your speech? What's the difference between quoting and paraphrasing? Well, a direct quote is testimony that is presented word for word from what that individual said. Paraphrasing is restating or summarizing that person's ideas into your own words. Either way, though, you want to give credit where credit's due and give that verbal citation. Never choose to quote out of context. The media does that a lot, don't they? They often take a person's words and they mix them around a good bit to kind of fit whatever it is that they want to discuss, or use it to be a headline to draw you in to click on the link to read the article. Never quote out of context. It's not responsible. Quoting out of context just means that we're quoting a statement in such a way as to distort its meaning by removing the statement from the words and phrases surrounding it. So choosing how you want to use it in the best way that suits you. We never want to quote out of context. Okay, well, that is it as far as our lesson 2, lecture 2 goes. If you have any questions at all, you just feel free to let me know. Don't forget, like I said, research is something that we should use in any type of speech for the most part. Probably wouldn't necessarily be in a special occasion speech unless you're opening with a quote about love or marriage or so forth. But it is something that we can definitely consider for every speech, and it's something that you should be using in your demonstration speech, your student choice speech, your informative speech, and your persuasion speech. So make sure to check out the assignment requirements for each of those speeches before you create the speech to make sure that you're doing all that's being asked of you. And if you do have questions along the way, just feel free to let me know. Thanks so much, guys, and I hope that you have a great week. Thank you.